I suppose that maybe many of us over the last maybe week or so, and maybe yesterday, you might have spent some time. Maybe you watched a documentary or watched some History Channel or something that might refresh our memories about what happened 20 years ago yesterday. And think about September 11th, 2001 and how things felt that particular morning. And I spent some time this past week just listening to those who had more direct experiences with those difficult days and the challenges that it presented. But today is September 12th, 2021, 20 years later. And this morning I'd like to ask this basic question. What happened to September 12th, 2001? What happened to that feeling where all pettiness kind of just went away? And all wranglings and disputings and fussing over words just kind of went away. And we didn't have that same sense of combativeness among ourselves. But there was a strange calm in the midst of a storm that we experienced as we kind of just felt like we're all in this together. And we were able to put aside so many various kinds of things that seemed to trouble men and challenge us. What happened to the contentment with clothing and something on the table that you felt on September 12, 2001? I remember Deborah and I Muddy Creek was having a gospel meeting in that same week. And on September 11th, that evening, Deborah and I, and the boys were just little. Sam would have been 3, and Isaac would have been not that old at all. And we went out to the gospel meeting at Muddy Creek, and we were coming home, and there was a gas station on our street heading back to our house there in Moundsville. And there were patrol cars. And we're like, whoa, what's happening? And they were there dealing with traffic for people trying to get gas. Fear kind of kicked in on September 11th. People were afraid that they wouldn't be able to get fuel. And so a gas station that you might typically see 1 or 2 cars at on any given moment that you would drive by had a line of traffic down the street. And here's the point I'm driving at. So Deborah asked me, do you think we should stop and get gas? And I said, if there's a real problem, a half a tank of gas isn't going to help us. And we drove on home. You know, we needed in that moment to just be content. That we were well. We had food and clothing. Our boys were healthy. We had a roof over our heads, a place of comfort for that night, and to accept the peace and calm and contentment of that moment. And so I ask you this morning, what happened to that? Have I completely forgotten? The phrase came up, we will never forget September 11th, and certainly we shouldn't, about the horrendous things that occurred on that day 20 years ago yesterday. But friends, I'm concerned that we have really forgotten the lesson, and that is what we became on September 12th. We've forgotten that. We've not just forgotten what happened on the horrendous moment and tragedy of terrorism, but we have forgotten that contentment and that sense of community and that sense of not desiring to just fuss and fume and strife over everything. And so today on September 12, 2021, 20 years later from that moment, let's talk a little bit about this idea of contentment. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of patience and contentment and godliness and what God would want us to appreciate. And just to set the stage definitively this morning, what I'm talking about is just simply the idea of simple contentment with life itself. We thought about the horrendous challenges and the devastating aspects of lives that were lost and families that were experiencing all those kinds of difficulties. And I can remember, because the Pennsylvania crash of Flight 93 was, by the way, flew right over top of us, roughly. I can remember Denise from Nashville calling to talk to me about, were we okay, because all she heard was south of Pittsburgh. You thought about all that, and all of a sudden you realize how a simplistic contentment in life we need to just experience and appreciate day to day. You just don't know. You don't know what kinds of events. So what I need to learn is the idea of just simply being contented with the moment that I have, and the blessings of the moment that I'm in. What happened to the compassion towards other people? And the idea of not feeling like I always have to combat my thoughts and my feelings and express all the things that I believe need to be said, but just simply the ability to show compassion towards others. Even a sense of quiet restfulness in the midst of tremendous change and challenge. What happened to that notion? I'm not talking about being indifferent, by the way. I'm not talking about a lack of sensibility in circumstances. I'm not talking about not being concerned about anything, or just this kind of self-isolation kind of approach to life, or self-satisfaction. But I'm talking about the idea of just simply being content in the moment. How do I develop the patience to allow me to be that when the world we live in seems to be very impatient? How is it that I can learn to bear trials calmly? How is it that I can find enough peace and patience in my own existence to be able to, when the crisis comes and when the challenge comes, to be able to find a way to navigate through all of that with a sense of calmness, not because of self, but because of the God who created all things? How do I learn to have forbearance under provocation? 10 years ago, September 11th hit on a Sunday, I believe. And I had just moved here. We had just came back to Paden City in June. And I preached a lesson on that particular September 11th. And I talked to you about the idea that probably all of us on September 11th, 2001 had a thought, maybe you didn't, but had a thought just like, nuke them, right? Just turn that sand into glass because of the anger. Fortunately, there was some forbearance, by the way. You imagine the colossal challenges we could have created globally if we had taken a very, very broad kind of just destroy that part of the world kind of approach. Some forbearance and patience was helpful nationally, but I want us to appreciate it from a very personal level as well. I need to learn forbearance when I'm provoked. I need to learn to bear under the idea that somebody has said something or offended or challenged or threatened, and to learn a level of patience that allows me to be forbearing underneath those things. How do I remain steadfast in the face of opposition to my faith and my desire to honor God? I'm not talking about laziness or resignation, but how is it that I use patience in an impatient world? And so now that I've defined what I'm talking about this morning, let's look at it together. And I want to begin this morning by talking about the idea of basic contentment. How do I get there? Let me share a couple of texts with you. You thought I'd never get to the Bible. We need to get to the Bible. Luke chapter 3. Luke chapter 3 and verse 12. The way I can begin to achieve personal basic contentment is to appreciate the concept of just honest labor, even when maybe accusation or challenge might be presented around me. In Luke chapter 3, beginning in verse 12, notice he said, "Then tax collectors also came to be baptized, and said to him, Teacher, what shall we do? That's an interesting, I don't know if you ever thought about that or not, but it sounds like these guys, these tax collectors, these publicans, they in their mind, they're wondering, do we even have a right to have benefit from baptism? All these other folks are accessing the benefits, and these guys were so accused of so many nefarious and challenging things that they wondered whether they even had a part in this. What should we do? I think that's very specific. Is there something we tax collectors who are kind of looked upon as folks to not be trusted or respected? And he said to them, Collect no more than what is appointed for you. Likewise the soldiers asked him, saying, What shall we do? And so he said to them, Do not intimidate anyone or accuse falsely, and be content with your wages. Be honest. That's what he said to them. He said to the tax collectors, Don't collect any more than you're supposed to collect. Be honest with people. Soldiers, what should we do? Be honest with people. If you're dealing with a real crime, then deal with it. But don't be a false accusing folks. Don't be challenging folks. Learn to be content with an honest approach to your work and labor. Friends, that's something I think all of us need to appreciate. To learn a level of contentment with just honest labor. Doing what my role and responsibility is, fulfilling that role, accepting responsibility for myself in relationship to those things. There's a level of contentment that can come, no matter what it is that you're doing. No matter whether you think what your role or work is important, or whether you think it's insignificant, no matter what you think of it, if you just attack that work and be honest in that labor, there is something rewarding and there's something contented about that. To know that I did my part and I fulfilled my role. And I did it honestly. I did my work with integrity. I accepted my personal responsibilities. Friends, my anecdotal kind of observationalist viewpoint in life sometimes is some of the most discontented people are people that don't do a whole lot. They're discontented because they never own responsibility for their own selves and their own actions and their own work. There's a level of contentment that can come when I just do my job, be honest about it, accept some personal responsibility for it, and there's a level of contentment that can come from that. And no matter what state or condition I might find myself in. Philippian writer wrote this in Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 10. Now, Paul said in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 10, I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at your last your care for me has flourished again, though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in regard to need, I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I need to learn the same. Paul said, I've learned, whatever state, I know how to be abased. It's not a word we typically use. I know how to suffer or be challenged. That's what he's saying. I know how to be on the bottom, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. Why? Because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. How did Paul learn to be content, whether he was abased on the bottom or whether he was abounding on the top? How did Paul learn contentment when things were great or things were not so good? And he did that because he knew where real strength came from. I don't know that I ever felt more helpless and more useless than I did on September 11, 2001. The pandemic is kind of pushing me that way. I feel pretty helpless and useless in today's world too, a little bit. But you understand what I'm talking about. There are times where we don't know what effect I can have on the challenge that's around. How do I learn contentment in the abased moments? How do I feel contentment when I feel that helplessness and that uselessness and not so sure how it is that I can affect the environment that I'm in? And Paul says you do that because you recognize who real strength comes from. I can do that because Christ strengthened me. I can get through September 11, 2001 because Christ strengthens me. I can get through the pandemic of 2020, 2021, 2020, whatever coming because Christ strengthens me. I don't know how I get contentment otherwise. I don't know how I find any patience and peace and contentment otherwise. If I'm trusting the world to provide some opportunity for me to arrive at that, if I'm looking for other kinds of things to help me achieve that kind of contentment that Paul spoke of here, it will not come. The only legitimate and real source of that kind of contentment that I'm looking at, where it doesn't matter what state or condition I'm in, can only come through Christ who strengthens me. He's the only legitimate source by which that can be accomplished. And so I encourage you, go back to September 12th. Historically, one of the greatest resurgences of religious thought and religious connections came starting September 12, 2001. It waned pretty quick. But I had people calling me and asking me Bible questions that I hadn't talked to in years. The challenge was trying to get them to recognize that they were maybe looking at things with interesting perspectives, and they should just be trying to build a faith and conviction in the Savior who could get us through these challenges. Whatever state or condition I find myself, I've got to learn contentment. And that means my temporal blessings. Go back to 1 Timothy chapter 6. If I've got food and clothing, I can learn contentment. I can make it through the day. Whether those shoes came from the Murphy Mart $5 bin, you're old enough, most of you here. Or whether they've got Michael Jordan's figure etched on the side, I can learn content either way. I can learn to just appreciate the basic needs that God provides for me on a daily basis. And sometimes I may abound and sometimes I may have little, but whatever it is, with godliness, I can have contentment with the basic sustenance in life. And the truth be known, I don't think any of us cared about those things on September 12th. 2001, we were thankful for the new day we were given and the bologna sandwich or whatever it was we had for lunch that day, and we realized that we were blessed. How do I learn patience in the midst of that same contentment then? How is it that I can have a level of patience when things seem so urgent and things seem so volatile and people just seem to be upset and frustrated and angry all the time? How do I navigate that? Because I certainly know and smart enough to know that I can't necessarily fix everybody else. Sometimes folks just want to be angry. There's sometimes not a lot that can be done, but I'm talking about what can I do? There's an interesting phrase I want you to notice in Luke chapter 21, verse 19. Jesus makes this statement in Luke chapter 21 and verse 19. Let me back you up just a little bit to get you a little context. Verse 16. You will be betrayed. This is what he's telling his disciples and followers. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Maybe not the last sentence, but I would imagine that most folks sitting here have at least witnessed and if not experienced that recently. Where family members are fighting and arguing over the various issues that are surrounding our present circumstance in this world, and the volatility that comes from all that anger and bent-up frustration. Certainly the gospel created that. Some obeyed, some did not, and that created a volatility among family members. He said, even a willingness for some family members to turn others in. You will be hated, verse 17, by all for my name's sake. But not a hair of your head shall be lost. Here's the phrase I want you to pick up on. By your patience possess your souls. By your patience possess your souls. You think about that concept. When emotion is driving the reactions and not patience. When situations are driving my reactions, my speech, my conduct, my behaviors. Who's in control in those moments? You know, when you or I jump when somebody says a trigger thought. When you and I are ready to just, the back of our hairs stand up. When we hear certain words, Republican, Democrat, vaccine, mask. And in our world, our hair stands up. And here's my point. Who's in control in that moment then? It's not me. Because all I'm doing is reacting. I heard a trigger word, a trigger topic, a subject matter, and now all of a sudden it's driving my behaviors. Jesus said, don't do that. How do I not do that, Jesus? Possess your soul. How do I do that? With patience. Patience is the character trait that allows me to possess my soul. Patience is the character trait that allows me to not be reactive and overreactive and respond to everything. The answer to our challenges right now, folks, is patience. Patience with one another. Patience with the environment we're in. Patience with officials and authority. Patience with educational systems. Patience with my friends and family members who may disagree. We've lost the ability. We've become discontented, and we've allowed that discontentment to drive an impatient process. And I've ignored the instructions of my Savior when He says, possess your soul, and you do that through patience. Now again, you heard the disclaimer at the beginning of the sermon, right? Maybe I should throw the slide back there. I'm not talking about the idea of just, whatever, nothing matters, nothing's important, there's no right and wrong, and there's no truth ever. That's not what I'm saying. But friends, we allow for too many things to, let me rephrase that. I allow too many things to trigger a response when what I should be doing is possessing my soul through patience and contentment. You thought the sermon was about you. It's not. It's about me. Right? It's about how each of us react and respond to the environment we're in. How do I focus then on what's important? Because that's the key, right? In volatile moments, in troubling times, in difficult situations in life, it is real quick or easy for us to get things out of focus. We don't see what's really important anymore. All we see is the distracted challenges. Even in the midst of crisis, what did Paul tell Timothy to do? Preach the word. Be instant in season, or be ready in season and out of season. Convince, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. At the end of the day, folks, our mission, if you will, as believers and followers of Jesus has never changed. It hasn't changed for centuries. To be beacons of light to bring folks to Jesus has been our mission from day one. But a lack of contentment and patience sometimes distracts us from what's really important. And we allow for a whole host of other kinds of topics and situations and thoughts to dominate our conversations. They dominate our thinking, and they dominate our behaviors and choices. And we lose sight of the mission. In the midst of all crisis and tragedy, a level of contentment and patience is necessary. When we came out of September 11th, 2001, I think in many ways, many congregations and individuals came out of that thinking, the world needs Jesus. Right? We thought about the religious context of what happened. And we thought in our minds, what's the answer? What's the anecdote? The antidote to that was Jesus. But we've lost our fervor for that recognition of the importance of that message. We exhort you there in verse 14 of 1 Thessalonians 5. We exhort you, brethren, warn those who are unruly, comfort the faint-hearted, uphold the weak. And here's the kicker. Be patient with all of them. Be patient with the unruly. That's what he said. Be patient with the weak. Be patient and comfort the faint-hearted. Quick thought for you. If you ever have looked at somebody's situation and you began your thought process about their situation by this phrase, I don't understand why. I don't understand why that bothers them. I don't understand why they don't do better. I don't understand. Be careful. Because we may be leading ourselves away from a patient understanding and a desire to really help the faint-hearted and to really help the weak. And we've all done it. We've all done it. And here's the sadder point. I have allowed those kinds of situations to move me into a discontented personal state. I became discontented and impatient because of somebody else's behavior. Because I didn't understand why they were acting that way, and I didn't understand why they were behaving that way, and why won't they listen to me? We all know this world would be better if everybody would just listen to me. If you all would just listen to me, right? You've got people in your life, if they would just listen to me, I'd have their problems fixed. You haven't even fixed all yours yet. I haven't even fixed all mine yet. What makes me think I'm the perfect candidate to fix all theirs? Now, yes, we need to be helpful. That's what he said. Help the faint-hearted. Hold up the weak need. Give them the support structure. Make yourself, but don't lose patience and contentment because people have left or behaved in certain ways. And certainly don't be so overwhelmed with those things that we forget that there's a primary mission that all of God's children need to be involved in, and that's sharing the gospel. I think we felt that September 12, 2001. I don't know where we're at in September 12, 2021. We need to have a proper perspective of the trials that we're experiencing. Let me jump to the 1 Peter text. 1 Peter chapter 2. You can write the other one down and look at it later if you'd like. 1 Peter chapter 2. Verse 21, or verse 20 beginning. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 20. For what credit is it if, when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. It's an interesting concept. If you want to pause for a minute, think about it. You know, sometimes we get caught with our hand in the cookie jar. Right? Proverb. And we know it. We know it. And the truth is, we just suffer through it patiently. Now, I was the good one growing up, so I rarely experienced punishments, and Mom rarely ever had to deal with me. Some of them, on the other hand. But there were moments where I knew that what I got, I deserved. And I patiently endured whatever consequence came because my behaviors led me there. I did it. I knew I did it. I knew right? And you just endure the consequence of it. But he said the real commendable act is not you're willing to endure the challenge or suffering patiently when you did wrong and you know you did wrong. But what happens when you suffer because you did right? God wants to know, how patient are you when you do what's right and you still suffer? How do you act in that moment? For to this you were called. You were called. That's the real, not to just suffer patiently when you do what's wrong and you know you did but how we endure hardship because we did what's right. To this you were called because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow His steps. Tell me, what did Jesus do to suffer all the harm and shame and difficulties He experienced? Exactly what did Jesus do to deserve any of that? And the answer is, you know it, He didn't do anything to deserve any of it. But what was commendable about what Jesus did is the manner in which He behaved and acted. Satan even knew Jesus could call thousands of angels anytime he wanted to. Jesus endured those things patiently, knowing all along that He hadn't done anything. Sometimes, friends, contentment and patience needs to be part of my character to the extent that even when I'm falsely accused, or even when I'm suffering because I'm trying to do what's right, that's where we're really being tested. And that's where a level of patience and contentment really needs to kick in. From our analogy, America is flawed. In many ways, America is deeply flawed. There's never been a perfect nation. There's a perfect kingdom led by Jesus Christ the King. But there's never been a flawless nation. But the truth is, we didn't deserve what happened on September 11, 2001. We don't deserve the animosity and the hatred that so many, for some reason, have developed for America. As flawed as we may be. And yet sometimes people hate others and we may not understand why. Sometimes people may be frustrated with you and we don't understand why. People may be angry at me and we don't understand why. And it may not be fair, it may not be right, but what's going to be evident in my life is how patiently and with contentment I endure those moments. Because that's what's commendable before God. That's what the narrative said. God is not just looking at how well we endure consequence of behavior when we did something wrong and we suffered consequence for it. He's looking upon us to see how well we handle the moments where we're challenged and suffer when we didn't do anything wrong. How do I respond to that? James wrote in James chapter 1 and verse 2. James chapter 1 and verse 2, he simply said, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various or diverse trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." The ability to endure and face challenge and trial with patience builds character. It allows for it to build a perfect work, the text says. Every time I fail to respond with patience, I'm not growing as James would have. I'm not getting myself to that perfect work, that character that God would have me to. And so I ask you this morning, are you and I willing to be content? Are we willing to be patient even when the environment might be leading me otherwise, even when choices of others might be leading me otherwise, even though the circumstances I'm in may be challenging me? How do I get back to September 12, 2001, where I was just content with the moment I had? How do I get back there? How do I get back to that day where it really didn't, all the things that we tend to fuss over just kind of went away for a while? Where contentment and patience with one another seem to kind of come to the forefront. Maybe that's the lesson 20 years later. The sadness of yesterday's reminders 20 years later are worth remembering. A contented resolve among people to put aside many petty issues on September 12th is also a lesson to be remembered. And I hope that this morning we reminded ourselves biblically of some of those lessons that we experienced. This morning we're going to sing together number 322. Is that correct, Brian? Sometimes I forget to go back and look at my numbers and make sure I got them right for you. We sing, "Bring Christ your broken life, so marred by sin." If you're subject to the gospel in some way this morning, if you're ready to establish a relationship with Jesus, to find remission of sins, or if there's something we could pray for you concerning, or as I always say, sometimes we just need to go home and get in our prayer closet and just open our hearts up to the Father and say, "This is where I'm struggling, Lord, and give me the strength and resolve to address these things." But if there's something we can encourage you in today, help you with this morning, to find salvation in Jesus, then we'd invite you to come while we stand.